Welcome to the first episode of a new series of my Tessa Talks To podcast, Series 5, Episode 1, where I'll be talking with 3 ex-pro musicians who have each taken a different path into business. Does their musical knowledge and training affect how they do business? What is it like conducting business through a musical lens? Today I'm talking with Joel Garthwaite, who has been a saxophonist and music teacher for 15 years, having graduated from the Royal Welsh College of Music and then completed his Masters at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama in London. Joel was a successful musician, playing with the London Contemporary Orchestra and playing regularly with his award-winning quartet, the Lunar Sax Quartet, before leaving the world of music and becoming a senior marketeer. He has worked with big corporate brands such as Nestle and Shell, delivering their sustainable messaging campaigns, and we're here today to discuss what music means to him. Thanks for being with me today, Joel, to talk about what music means to you.
You're welcome.
What does music mean to you at this moment in your life?
At the moment, I'm less involved in music than I have been for a long time, actually. So it means different things to me than it has done in the past. Whereas it used to be, the way I made money and my main kind of job, it's much in a nice way. It's become a bit more of a hobby, and I use it for more recreational purposes than I used to. So whereas I used to kind of look at music in a very analytical way and find it very difficult actually to disconnect hearing music from analysing it and critiquing it. And I found that because I've been out of music for a little while, or not out of it, but less intensely into it than I used to be, I'm able to kind of enjoy music more. It's given me a little bit more of a kind of creative let off, I suppose, and I'm able to kind of listen to things less critically and just enjoy a variety of things
with a fresher approach.
Yeah, and without the worry that someone's going to ask for an opinion on something and expect it to be critical rather than I like it or no, I
less
don't
judgmental
like it.
anyway, more open. Because your past work as a saxophonist, music was an intense part of your life, playing, performing, writing, arranging, and you were a founding member of the Lunar Sax Quartet.
Yeah, we started the Lunar Sax Quartet whilst we were undergrad students in Cardiff, the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama, and it was really something to keep us busy because as a saxophone player, there's not exactly a lot of performance opportunities out there. So we were creating our own opportunities, trying to think a bit entrepreneurial about things. There were a couple of more successful saxophone quartets that we kind of admired and kind of tried to follow in the footsteps of. But really, we didn't think that it would become what it was in a professional outfit and something that was actually going to earn us a little bit of a living.
Through recordings, through performances.
Yeah,
you were
exactly.
successful. You were signed to Signum.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We did very well in a fairly short period of time. And looking back on it, it's much more of an achievement now than it was whilst we were in it at the time, if that makes sense. And I think hindsight is a wonderful thing for gaining a bit of perspective and looking back on achievements and kind of putting them into context. Because when you're just in it and you're constantly driving yourself to kind of the next best thing all the time, it's kind of all consuming.
You're breaking new ground, and that requires a lot of energy to get to the next thing, to create the connections, to commission the new pieces, to get the funding in order to do that, which is all in itself thinking of yourselves as a business and needing a lot of entrepreneurial skills, presumably.
Yeah, I think so. I think to be successful in music, it's got to be a combination of talent to begin with, but then drive, because you can be talented without the drive to succeed, and a little bit of kind of business nous in there as well. You don't have to be Alan Sugar to kind of make a success of things, but I think you do need to be aware of some of the more kind of business-centric things that are required, because ultimately, whatever you do, the goal is to make a profit. Whereas I think a lot of musicians go into the professional world, with the creative arts as the four most important thing. Whereas ultimately that can only be sustainable for so long before ultimately you need to pay the bills and have a mortgage. And as the family grows and things, you need to be profitable.
More commitments. Yeah. Well, why don't we now listen to you playing with the Lunar Sax Quartet, playing On Song by John Mutkow.
Yeah. So this piece was a commission, actually, which we got funding for from T. Kerrith, which is an organisation based out of the Millennium Centre in Wales. And they fund activity within Welsh music and Welsh composers. And we were fortunate enough for them to pay for the recording of this album, as well as contribute quite heavily towards the commission of the writing of it. It was joint funded, I think, between T. Kerrith and Live Music Now for an anniversary year of theirs. Here it is.
So looking back over your life as a professional musician, and now you are a marketing director, what would you say is the key learnings that you've taken from life as a musician, aside from technique and performance? What have you really brought into your new life as a marketeer?
It's interesting. I think one thing that marketing professionals who have trained professionally within marketing do is they tend to overcomplicate things, and they look at theory and technique, and they look at testing ideas, and sometimes I think they just lose that core idea of communicating an idea as simply as possible. And one thing that musicians are, well, they should be amazing at, is taking an idea, in the case of musicians, it's a musical idea, from someone else. It's not their own idea all the time. So they're taking the composer's idea in the writing and communicating that idea in the most effective way to an audience. And it's not dissimilar to marketing in any way. That audience within a concert hall, yes, they have an appreciation of music, probably, but they have different levels of their appreciation of music.
And understanding.
Exactly. So you've got people who are probably following the score, and they're real musicologists, and they know the composers and they know the artists, and they're properly embedded in that world. But then you've got people who are just looking for something to do on a Tuesday evening, and they might be a member of the South Bank Centre, for example, and they're just going along to things to enjoy music. Yeah. So the musician's responsibility is obviously to convey that idea in its most stripped back, emotional way to resonate with those different audiences, and marketing is the same.
Complete clarity of thought and delivery.
Yeah. So within marketing, for example, it might be communicating the core idea of a business. What does the business do and where can it benefit others, and it's communicating that effectively and clearly and concisely, without all the jargon that goes with it. And the same as music, all the jargon is kind of unnecessary. Yes, you need it whilst you're learning, but when you're consuming it in the audience, you haven't got all of that time behind it. It's just you producing a sound and connecting with someone. Yeah. So it's the same approach that I take to working within the corporate world, really. It's taking a simple idea and communicating it as effectively as you can.
And you work a lot around identity of messaging and communicating the sustainable messaging for big brands like Nestle and Shell. I mean, that's a tough gig in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, sustainability is more important than it's ever been, and it's ingrained into virtually every business on the planet now. There's so much about it in the press, and it's in the forefront of everyone's minds. And the way that these big brands talk about their ambitions and what they're doing currently to improve the way that they do business and make it more sustainable is vitally important. On the outside of things, for people who are not sitting on the board of these large-scale organizations that you mentioned, it feels like you're really removed from it, and it's hard to kind of penetrate that world and get the information that you need to work out whether they're a good company or a bad company. But actually, even at the most what might be considered publicly evil organizations that exist, there's a lot of good work being done within those organizations to improve their practices and improve the transparency of their supply chains, and to improve methods that they've used in the past for production and make them more green, and just make everything better and more in line with what we need to do in the modern world rather than what we were doing even 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And messaging is a vital part of that. They're complicated organizations, complicated programs that they're running around sustainability. And it's been my job to help them communicate that to their shareholders and to wider stakeholders in the easiest way that there is to understand it.
Communicating their messaging externally, but also communicating within a team. And how have you found working with teams in the corporate world as opposed to orchestral teams or ensemble mentality that you had as a quartet player, playing with the London Contemporary Orchestra, in the orchestra? I mean, listening is obviously at the core of both those parallels. But yeah, it'd be interesting to hear from you a little bit about that dynamic and what you've taken from the musical world into teamwork.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's something that I try and do as much as I can, is take learnings from one industry and apply them to the other, because, you're talking here about what can be learned on one side, but equally, what can be taken back from the corporate world into the arts as well, because there's learnings from both. I think for me, the main difference is around creative thinking, and around the way that problems are solved or try to be solved within these organizations. It tends to follow quite a hierarchical process of someone leading with an idea, and then a wider team deciding whether that idea is a good one, and then everyone just kind of falling in line. Whereas working within the arts, it is far a flatter structure where everyone's voice is heard a bit more readily. Exactly. And I think that is improving within the corporate world. There's more learnings and there's more readings and there's more information available at that way of working now. Yeah. I think that kind of is being flattened out a little bit. But definitely that idea of kind of problem solving that you have within music, whether it's something that's incredibly difficult to piece together because the music is complicated and it requires locking in, and everyone
break it down.
Exactly. And everyone needs to listen and really find where your part is within the piece. That still isn't happening, I don't think, within the corporate world. I still think it's this idea of people generally have kind of fairly traditional structure of senior management. Yeah. And there is that feeling that people less worthy as it might seem need to toe the line, whether they agree or they don't. So I think
rather than owning your part, essentially, and being responsible for your voice in amongst the ensemble, being a solo within the group to
Yeah, and I still think that some companies do that better than others, and some companies are more willing to take that approach, because I still think that for the vast majority of large organizations, they have this kind of career pathway within them. So if you start as a graduate and then you end up spending a long time with the company, there's kind of key milestones along your journey within a company to get you from your graduate position to one day a partner or a director. And there's a feeling within the corporate world that if you steer off that pathway and you start talking about things that maybe are outside your position, that pathway can move and maybe not go the way that you want it to. So
you're fairly restricted unless you take a risk and you're brave and you really know where or you don't need to know where you're going, but you're willing to take that leap.
Yeah.
As musicians, you have to do in every rehearsal and every...
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that is the beauty of music, is it's so nimble and fleet of foot. You can try an idea immediately with no consequence, really. If you're in a rehearsal, you can try it. It doesn't work, great, we'll try something else. If it does work, great, we'll bank it and we'll put it forward, to the wider thing.
Well, even as a jazz musician in performance, in the moment, you're improvising the whole time. There are no... wrong notes, you're reacting, you're creating, it's in the moment.
I think it's the way that people view risk, really, because I don't really like the word risk, because I'm more concerned with opportunity than risk, and I know they're linked, but obviously if you're dealing with large amounts of money, risk is obviously more important than if you're in a rehearsal room and just trying out ideology and playing things. And it feels like a very casual situation with nothing at risk. Whereas obviously if you're trying an idea that's being funded by shareholder money or by investment, or money that could potentially just be thrown down the drain if that thing is wrong, the appetite for risk naturally decreases. So,
which is completely at odds though with this need and this current wave for innovation. You can't have innovation without risk taking and freedom of expression. And I feel like that is something which really restricts that pathway. If you're talking about pathways in terms of new ideas, you can't have any new ideas without challenging and risk taking and innovating.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think innovation can be done in a sustainable manner as well. It doesn't always have to be, we're going to throw the kitchen sink at this, and it's one idea, and if it doesn't work, everything fails. If you took that approach to investments, no one would make any money. You have to have a diverse portfolio in order to make long-term money.
Perhaps it's also knowing when to stop the progression of ideas and when to start the performance, because as a musician, you rehearse, you practice new ideas collaboratively, you're always experimenting, trying new phrases, new timbres, but then that at one point that has to stop and you have to perfect and polish the delivery of performance. And that is something which is natural for a musician, but perhaps less natural in the corporate world in terms of brainstorming and knowing when.
And I think that's something, until you've just said it, I've not thought too much about, actually. But you're absolutely right. As a musician, you can always change, so you play something, you've rehearsed it for, let's pretend it's a year, and then you finally get to play it. That doesn't mean that performance becomes the definitive performance and you never change. You can change it for the next performance. You can constantly tweak it to improve it. And a lot of businesses don't take that approach. So for example, they launch, let's say, a new visual identity or a new branding, and then they'll just leave it for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, however long, without the kind of feel and the need to tweak the messaging or tweak it, the visual aspect of it in any way. And it's crazy, now you've mentioned it, that actually, why wouldn't you change it and improve it and tweak it? That doesn't necessarily mean kind of changing the company identity completely, but just kind of keeping it refreshed.
Refreshed. Yeah. Well, let's listen to you play again with the Lunar Sax Quartet.
Yeah, so it's a track from an album by a composer called Dave Stapleton, who we commissioned to write. Originally, it was a piece for saxophone, quartet, and piano. Dave's a jazz pianist who owns Edition Records, and we were at college together, and we we went through a phase of commissioning music for quartet and piano because we wanted to free up the baritone saxophone from just playing bass lines all the time, essentially. So we thought, well, if we introduce a piano, we've got a wider timbre and a wider sound range that we can play with. So we asked Dave to write a piece for us, and it turned into this kind of 45-minute suite, which we played many times as a quartet and piano, but then it had a life of its own where we introduced more instruments to turn it into something a bit more cinematic. So we introduced drums and a jazz trumpet player, double bass. And it kind of turned into a much more cinematic record, which we brought. It was one of the first, if not the first, discs that was brought out on Edition Records.
That's really interesting, like what you were just saying about the vision identity being able to be morphed and changed. That's exactly it. Even in a commission where money is at risk and stakeholders are at risk, big commission work, to be able to continue to change it, morph it without any failings, just with development.
And Dave Stapleton is a really good example of someone who sees opportunity, and he's a shrewd businessman as well as a fantastic musician. Dave saw early on that the longevity of this piece, the amount it was going to be played, where it could actually live as its own art form, was severely impacted by it being a quartet and piano piece. Whereas if you introduce a wider range of instruments to it, it's got a new life, a new sound, it becomes syncopable, it becomes commercially viable, it becomes appealing to a jazz audience as well as a niche classical audience. So Dave is a really good example of someone who sees opportunity in things.
Great. Well, let's have a listen to Of Willow Fringe. What do you miss, Joel, about not playing regularly on the saxophone?
When I'm not playing, I don't miss anything, actually. In the periods where don't have a saxophone in my mouth, I don't miss it at all, which is a bit weird.
Yeah, having spent the best part of 15 years practicing playing.
Yeah, occasionally I get these kind of pangs of, I really fancy doing some practice. And that's nice. I still do a little bit of private teaching, actually. And I've got a couple of really great pupils who are applying to music college now. And that keeps me on my toes, and it's given me a reason to practice again recently.
That's good, yeah.
Them playing music that is hard as opposed to kind of teaching a beginner has kind of led me to do a bit more practice and kind of actually get my head back into kind of repertoire.
And again. Thinking analytically again, I guess.
Yeah, and listening again. So listening to versions of the pieces that we're playing and different recordings of it and what different artists are doing differently with the music. So it's kind of got my head back in the game. But I don't miss anything when I'm not playing. But then when I am playing, I do really miss it. Do
you miss the level that you were at and the level of detail that you gave to practice and performance?
Yeah, I miss the amount of time I used to have, I think, more than anything, having just nothing else to do other than practice when you're at music college. And then when you're playing professionally, most of your downtime is either listening or doing or practicing. And it's just that kind of connection with the instrument. The less I play, the less I feel connected to my instrument. I remember really clearly when I was playing, all hours of every day, just the instrument being part of you, and it feels so familiar.
An extension of your body.
Exactly. And, I don't have that feeling anymore. It feels like I put it in my mouth and I know what to do, and everything kind of works, but it's almost as if it's in third gear all the time.
Exactly. It's quite poignant, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a bit of a sense of loss.
Yeah, I get it back fairly quickly, I have to say. If I can do a couple of hours of practice and get my head back into it, it starts to come back really quickly. Yeah.
What hurdles did you personally face in the transition from music to marketing, and how do you feel that you overcame them? Because it's quite a big transition to go really from performing to...
Yeah, I think, I've always been quite entrepreneurial as a musician. I've looked for opportunity, whereas I think other people is just expect things to be given to you. And I think part of that comes from playing the saxophone. We haven't got orchestras that we can just, there's not 30 saxophones in an orchestra like there are violins. We just don't create that opportunity. Yeah, you've got to create that, and I learned that fairly early on. So I've always tried to create those opportunities, and part of that is marketing yourself or marketing whatever project you're doing. And from there, I was conscious that it's really, really difficult to make a really good living for yourself and your family from purely just being a musician in the genre that I'm in. There's a realism that's attached to it. And that's why I started Bright Ivy, which was essentially a marketing agency for the arts and an artist management agency. And that was the first kind of hurdle, I suppose, is going from thinking you're quite good at marketing and thinking you're quite good at promoting things to actually setting up an organization which is doing it for other people rather than yourself.
Fitting in processes. And
yeah, exactly. And learning along the way. I mean, God, every day you fail at something and you learn from it and don't try not to do it again or improve it. And, Bright Ivy was started with zero capital. It's not like what you might see on TV for these startup companies within technology who just get privately funded by millions of pounds. We started, literally zero money, absolutely nothing. And, it's got to where it's got just through kind of, I think, partly connections, being both Phil Venables, who's my business partner, and I, we're immersed in that world, or certainly I was immersed more in it at that time. So we were well connected with musicians that we wanted to work with, but also that kind of entrepreneurial drive to make it work and to actually say, well, we can't make a living just from playing. So where else is this money going to come from to pay our mortgage? Yeah. So, that's why it was created. And from there, I suppose it was difficult to get into the corporate world, which I'm far more involved with now, purely because the arts is just seen by corporate organizations as a little bit wishy-washy, a little bit kind of fluffy and creative. Yeah, and it's really difficult, I found, actually, to say, hang on a minute, I've got some skills here that you guys can really benefit from, just because I implement those in the arts world at the moment for musicians and art organizations. What is completely transferable to what you do, and probably you need it even more than the arts organizations I work with. But do you know what? It was incredibly difficult to penetrate that world, and it was
it's unfamiliar. Your background is unfamiliar, and it's something that's so intangible and so innate for musicians. It's something we've done potentially for 30 years, but to then articulate that as a business benefit is you have to speak their language or the language of the business to really articulate the message of that.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to show value, haven't you? And it's difficult sometimes for them to see that value from, if you haven't graduated with an economics degree or with an MBA or with, a marketing degree. It's like, oh, what's that? You've got a master's in music. How the hell is that kind of relevant for me? And how is that going to improve what I do? So it was a tough sell in.
Yeah.
I was lucky, actually. It was luck that someone that I play cricket with locally happened to have a marketing business, a marketing agency in Cambridge, who was doing the same stuff that I was doing, but for corporate organisations rather than the arts. And because we were playing cricket with each other every Saturday and talking, and he had a better understanding of my skills than maybe if you'd gone to an interview and you've got 20 minutes to explain to an organization where your value is. So that's how I kind of got into it, was through that. And then, progressed through a couple of other agencies, moved around a little bit.
But once you've got that foot in the door, and then it's an understandable reference point, isn't it, for working your way up?
Yeah, I think so. That's right.
So what does the next 10 years look like for you, Joel? Would you consider returning to the world of the arts at all? I mean, the arts could really benefit from all your experience working with all these big brands, but equally, those big brands are benefiting now from your experience in music. So where do you see yourself?
Well, I've just taken on a new job. So I've been agency side for the past 4 or 5 years. And I've just taken on a new role actually as director of marketing at a software company, publicly listed software company, who've got a new product, a kind of internal communications project, which I think there's a lot of value in, and I think I can help promote it and help market it. And obviously, it's a much wider market than a lot of things that I've done before, which tend to be quite corporate-y, communications-y, but this is much more B2C. So depending on how that goes, 10 years seems like a long time. It certainly is within technology.
Yeah, it is. Actually, be working with
exactly.
Things that don't exist now.
So I'm going to be focused on that for the next little while. I'm trying to help get that going. But I don't really consider that I'm out of the arts. I said about a return to it. I think it would be very difficult to come back in. Financially, yeah. I think, it's you kind of start living to your whatever you're bringing in, and then
too many holidays, Joel.
Too many holidays.
Just took that holiday to Mauritius.
Yeah,
we can only dream of.
Well, you gotta, we don't. My family, my wife and I, we don't kind of spend on what most people might see as kind of frivolous things. We don't have a lot of kind of techie possessions or anything, or we don't kind of buy anything that we don't need. So what we spend our money on really is either a holiday every now and again, or eating at nice restaurants. And so that's
quality of lifestyle.
I think so. Yeah.
And you're heading back to Cambridge later. What will you be listening to on your commute back to Cambridge?
I tend not to listen to too much music actually when I'm commuting. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I listen to a lot of audiobooks actually. Tend to be around marketing or business or that kind of thing.
Or the Tessa Talks 2 podcast.
Exactly. It's my go-to podcast. But I listen to a lot of music that I have early connections with. I think there's something nostalgic about it. And the older I get, actually, I can see now why my dad kind of listens to music that, was resonated with him when he was younger. And it's the same thing's happening to me, as I've kind of grown a bit grayer. I think I'm kind of listening to stuff that has a kind of an emotional connection from earlier on in my life, rather than cutting edge music that's being released, and it's that need to keep up has kind of gone. I think we're going to have a little listen to something in a second, which is a piece called Chasing Sheep is Best Left to Shepherds, which is from a film called The Draftsman Contract, and it's by Michael Nyman. And this piece is really important to me because I remember as an 11-year-old, I played piano as a first instrument before I started playing saxophone. I didn't start playing the saxophone until I was about 11 or 12, when my dad got one for his 40th birthday from my mum. And I used to go to his lessons with him.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and kind of hear
You played duets with him?
Well, we only had one saxophone. So, it was difficult to play duets. So I used to kind of try and play a bit of piano if he played, but I think it's, as you know, it's difficult as an adult beginner, isn't it, to pick it up. So as an 11-year-old, I was picking it up miles quicker than he was. I think it did. So his saxophone became my saxophone quite quickly. Okay. And so I was quite late on the saxophone, and I didn't have that kind of, I went to a state school. I wasn't surrounded by, the caliber of musician that go to, music schools like Chet's or Purcell. So I was literally the only saxophone player I knew. I was taught by a clarinetist, so I was kind of, odds are against me a little bit. But I got a book for Christmas one year when I was about 11 or 12 called A Guide to Classical Music. And it was kind of like,
Penguin.
Yeah, like a kind of, quite a thick compendium, plotting the history of classical music, which in reality meant, right the way from Renaissance through to modern music. And there was a piece in there. It was track number 1 of the second disc, where the first disc was all the old stuff, and then the disc 2, when CDs were a thing, was the new stuff, apparently. And it was this piece, and I was just blown away by it because it sounded like Purcell, but it also sounded modern, and it had saxophones in it, and I was like, oh my god, there's like music like this that exists that sounds quite cool and quite funky, and it's got energy to it that's not kind of just arrangements of Bach or Telemann. It's like music that's being written by someone who's alive for the instrument.
It's relatable as a child. You want to know that it's current and that you can be a part of it.
Yeah, and this piece was that kind of spark for me, and I still listen to it now. I think it's as good as it ever was, and it's still relevant, and it just happens. Unbeknown to me at the time, John Harl, who was one of the saxophonists with the Michael Nyman band, was playing on this thing. And John later became my teacher, and it was purely coincidental, I'm sure. But this track has a lot of meaning for me.
Thank you so much for being my guest today. Let's have a listen now to Michael Nyman's Chasing Sheep is Best Left to Shepherds. Thank you for listening. Today I was talking with Joel Garthwaite about looking at business through a musical lens. Tune in next month when I'll be chatting with another ex-pro musician about what music means to them.